I know what you guys are probably thinking. Am I watching an episode of Comic Culture or Take You? To answer that question, you're definitely watching Take You, the show where we take you on a journey through the life of someone who's imagined a dream and made it a reality. Today, we will take you through the life of Professor Terrence Dollard. I would like to welcome a man who has shared his love for comics with many people all over the region. Thank you for coming.
Well, thanks for having me, Alexis.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's been a good day.
All right. Well, can you tell us a little bit about Comic Culture?
Sure. Comic Culture is a program where I interview the men and women who make comics. We see a lot of Hollywood films that are based on comic books, but we don't really know about the men and women who work every month to put those comics out that inspire those movies and TV shows. And the process that they go through is labor intensive, and there's not a lot of money in it. So when I get a chance to talk to these folks, it reminds me of all those great stories that I loved reading as a kid, but also it inspires me to be more creative because, they're doing something that they love, knowing that the return isn't always that great.
Nice. Well, how long have you been doing Comic Culture?
We started doing it in one of the classes. As you know, on campus, we teach 4 levels of television production. And one of the classes is here in the studio where students are supposed to direct a TV show. And when we have 24 students a semester, we've got to be creative when we come up with those shows. So one semester I decided, hey, I've got some comic stuff laying around the house. Why don't we try and get in touch with somebody who's involved in comics, see if we can get them to come into our studio and we can talk to them. Well, it worked out pretty well. I had someone else host those first 2 shows. And then when we decided to move the show from my class to another class that we do called Practicum, where our students are able to work on series here at the university rather than having to get in the car and go to Raleigh or Charlotte. We give them a chance to work on real shows during the semester here on campus. So we turned Comic Culture into a weekly series, and I started going out and making contact with writers and artists. And it's been a struggle to get some of the guests. And over the last few years, it's sort of snowballed and gotten a little bit easier for me to get in touch with folks. But back in those days, we were lucky if somebody returned an email, and then we were able to get a guest. But we use Skype, which is kind of interesting because we're able to bring guests from across the country into North Carolina, into Pembroke, into our studio. So we've had guests from California, from Israel, from Italy, and all points in between. Although right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean would be kind of tough. But so what's great is that we're able to show our students that there are tools available here in Pembroke that can connect them with the rest of the world, that they can put out a product that is just as good as something that's being done in a bigger city, a bigger school. And we're going out of our way to give them the opportunity to work on something that's kind of fun. At least I think it's fun.
Okay, so do you always contact these people through emails, like researching like who they are and everything, or do you meet them in conferences or
Well,
something?
sometimes I will go to different conventions. My favorite is Heroes Con in Charlotte. It's kind of like San Diego Comic-Con if you take away all the movie stars and all of the hype. Basically, when you go to Heroes Con, you're dealing with a lot of fans who love comics, but you're also dealing with a lot of artists. They book a lot of artists to be guests in what they call Artist Alley. So there'll be hundreds of artists, and there'll be people that you grew up reading as a kid. There'll be the people who are making the hit books right now, and the folks who are looking to break in, or maybe they don't do superheroes, they do some alternative comics. And they really go out of their way to bring in a lot of really diverse guests. So I go there with some friends, or in the case of last year, Dr. Liddy from our department, she and I were able to get a grant so we could spend 3 days at the convention, and we do a series of interviews, but I also go there basically to show my face to these folks and let them know what I do and try and get their contact information. You can have a pretty good conversation with somebody at one of these conventions. So what I've been able to do is just talk to them about what they do, talk to them about what I do, and hopefully they'll remember me when I send out an email in a month or 2. And then from there, we sort of develop that relationship, work around their schedule, see if we can get them into our recording date. Sometimes they answer the email, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I will go to their websites. If I don't meet them at a convention, I'll go to their website and I'll just, send an email. I follow a lot of folks on social media, Twitter, trying to get in touch with them. And slowly but surely, it's made those inroads to now I can send an email and I will get a response. A lot of times it's, get back to me after this deadline. But, it's good to know that slowly but surely we're able to make more of an inroad with creators and get those connections so that way we have more guests and we have more content for folks out there who might be interested in comics and maybe writing or drawing or something like that.
That's pretty awesome. So, in your opinion, how do you think the comics have changed since you were a kid?
That's a great question. Comics have changed a lot since when mainstream comics began. If we go back to the start of it is generally like the 1920s, 1930s, but comics really changed into what we recognize as comic books in 1937, I think that's the right year. It was when Superman Action Comics #1 comes out. Let me see, no, 1938, pardon me, I checked over here. And that's when we see the first superhero, and that changes the industry because normally comics were just repurposed Sunday funnies. They would take those books and reprint them into a new cover and sell them. We started to see new content created, and now superheroes make everything all the more exciting. But you also have other genres of comics at that time. You've got mysteries, you've got crime, you've got true romance that becomes popular in the 50s, you get science fiction. You even get horror comics that are so gruesome that they require the industry to change to a more safer, kid-friendly format in the late 50s and through the 60s. So when I was younger, the comics were really superhero focused. It was the big two publishers, Marvel and DC. The stories were becoming more sophisticated. You could read a story and kind of follow the path of the character over the course of a year, and they'd be really concerned about what happened in January was still true in December. So that way you didn't feel like you were missing anything. And then sometime in the 1980s, it changed from being sort of fun adventure to being more grim and gritty. I remember being very excited when Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns came out, which was sort of if you took the 1960s Batman TV series and you put him in sort of a hellish landscape of the 1980s, what would that do to that particular Batman? So he, in this case, becomes very violent. And we start to see, because that book was successful, more of the books start to get dark and gritty. And then The Watchmen comes out, and now all characters have to be, psychologically damaged. And we're starting to see this turn because, comics go in cycles, and we've gotten really tired of seeing everything grim and gritty. And we see it reflected in the movies that come out. DC Comics movies generally are a little darker in tone, whereas the Marvel movies are a little bit lighter. And now we're seeing that Marvel is teaching DC a thing or two about the movies. And with Wonder Woman coming out, it looks like DC is trying to lighten up their tone a little bit. And, comics have changed, and I think it's because the audience has become more sophisticated. The TV shows, the films have certainly helped that. And I'm excited to see what happens in the future.
Speaking of how comics have changed, over the years we have actually transitioned into more of a film industry. So in your opinion, how do you think comics actually are better than film?
I look at it in the sense that I can draw something that can't possibly be shown in real life. But now with CGI, we're able to create a lot of it. And the problem that I have with a lot of the superhero movies is that you can have 2/3 of the movie that's really exciting and really good, and then the last 30 minutes is going to be the big battle between the hero and the villain. And thanks to computer graphics and the fact that we can make stuff in the computer that looks realish, we'll have video game characters fighting each other, and it takes me out of the movie. What I like about comics is that comics, it's still someone sitting there drawing it out. They have to come up with how to pose everybody, and they have to do it in 20 pages a month. And that, to me, is a little bit more creative than a bunch of special effects. And, the movies can be interesting, but sometimes I like to just make it simpler, look at that book. I can always go back and pick something up that I missed without all the noise, without the knowing that the last 30 minutes is just going to be a lot of screaming and punching and stuff.
Okay. Well, you're a professor here at the university, and you're the producer and the host of Comic Culture. But it's to my understanding that you also have created your own comics. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the things that I do in my job is I teach television production, which is very hands-on technical. And I end up spending a lot of my time in my office or in the editing lab working on the computer. So I decided I wanted to do something that I did back in high school, which was draw comics. And I thought, well, do I want to try doing this digitally? Because, it would be fun to learn that. But then I thought, why don't I just go back to basics? Let me get the pencils, let me get the Bristol board, and let me do it the old-fashioned way. So in my spare time, I've been working on a long-form graphic novel called The Agreement. I have a website called uptoncomics.com, and there's our logo up there. And those are the 3 characters that I've centered my story around. And what I do is when I have some free time, which is getting less and less these days, I like to sit down, play some music, and just draw their adventures. It's just a great way to focus on what I love about storytelling. I don't have to worry about the technology, and I can be in control of everything. When I work on movie stuff, I've got to worry about actors showing up. I've got to worry about, can they deliver the lines the way I envision it in my head? I've got to worry about, can the camera get the action the way I want it to be covered? I've got to worry about editing it. It takes a long time. Whereas I can draw a page of a comic, if I've got the time, in principle, in a week. If I don't have the time, 2 weeks, a month, or in the case of the page that's on there right now, since the end of December. So it's just a great way to just have that release, not worry about your job, just do something fun and creative, and there's no wrong way to do it. And that's the best part, is knowing that no matter what I do, it's always going to be right because it's something that I feel like doing at that moment.
Okay, well, growing up, did you always know you were going to be able to write your own comics?
I did a lot of drawing when I was younger. I have 2 older brothers, and we would do a lot of stupid stories. Whether we were playing with Matchbox cars, we would have entire storylines worked out where this person is under investigation for this, and this person is embezzling money from the bank. That's the problem with being the youngest, and you have older brothers who get bored playing young kid games. But that taught me some elements of storytelling, and the things that they got interested in, I got interested in at a younger age. And so I would just sit down sometimes and start drawing up these goofy comics, or I would, we would take paper and make long spools out of it and have rolls so we could do our own TV show. We get a cardboard box, cut the screen out, and then we kind of roll it to tell different stories. So we did a news report about a fire, so we got to draw the pictures of the firefighter and the building burning and everything. So it was just stuff like that that was so much fun. And when I was in high school, I really enjoyed taking art classes. And we had a cartooning teacher, and from there I kind of got hooked on doing stuff with brush and ink, which is a lot of fun. You make a lot of messes doing it, but it's a lot of fun. And I stopped sometime in my early 20s, I guess, because I started playing a lot of music with bands and started going out with the ladies a lot more. And you have less time to sit at the drawing board. It's not quite as cool as spending a Friday night out with friends. So I was able to kind of move into it as I got older. But yeah, it was a great way to, again, tell stories. And you're always doing something creative, and that's what I like about it.
Well, clearly you've always had a creative mind. But as far as comic culture goes, what was your best chat that you had with one of the artists or writers, if you can tell me about a time for you?
Yeah, I view comic culture as it's a conversation between me and a writer or artist. And I just try and learn as much as I can from them. And what's really cool is when they are super excited about talking about what they do. Not necessarily, oh, what Wolverine should do or what Spider-Man should do, but what they do to tell their stories. One of my favorites was talking to Walter Simonson. Now, he's not a household name, but in my house he is. He was the guy who took Thor from being a really boring character in the 80s and built up the mythos to what we see in the films today. Without Walter Simonson working on Thor, no one's going to care. So I got to talk to him about that, but I got to talk to him about how he approaches building a page. And it might seem simple. Well, I just get out my ruler, I draw a panel, I put some pictures in there. But he talks about how you can build a page in such a way that you have a smaller element at the top and it becomes sort of like a weight at the bottom by making many panels on the bottom. Or you could reverse it. Or you could do it this way so that it seems like the whole page is pushing your eye towards this direction. And it's stuff like that that's really interesting to hear what they think, but also makes you think when you're doing the artwork. Another guest that I absolutely love, he's been on a couple of times, is Tom Lyle. He was the artist on a book called Starman. He created the Robin, Tim Drake, who's one of the more, I guess, successful Robins. He had his first solo series that he got to draw. And he also worked on Spider-Man when he was during the Clone Saga. He's also a professor of sequential art, and he loves, like me, he loves to talk. So once you get him wound up, I could show him a piece of artwork, and he can dissect it in such a way that explains to you what's wrong, what's right, and what is so much great about it. He has such an enthusiasm that he can look at a piece of artwork that might not be the best rendering, but has so much energy, he can appreciate it. And he can explain to you why it works and what works about it and how it pulls the eye and stuff like that. Having those conversations is just so much fun. And there are plenty of people that I would love to talk to, and hopefully someday I'll get to talk to them because they've inspired me. But those are the guests that I find most interesting, the ones who make me want to sit down and just keep drawing.
Okay. Well, the show's been picked up by UNC TV as well as the show airs on YouTube. So how have you gained so many viewers? Like, I know on YouTube you've got about 2,000 views per video and you've got about 310 subscribers. How did you gain such a large audience?
It's been really slow. It's picked up a lot in the last year. I think I had one guest who contacted me. He said that he had been watching the shows on YouTube, thought I was doing a good job. No one's doing a show like this. And I kind of took a moment. I thought, well, maybe he's just, trying to, blow sunshine up my skirt, so to speak. But turns out he was an illustrator, and he has talked to a lot of comic artists himself. And I had him as a guest on the show because he's trying to, break into comics, and he's got some great theories on art. And what he's done a lot of times is say, hey, I know so-and-so, I'm going to send you his email address. And that's been great. And since I've been working with Modi Friedman is his name, I've gone from about 25 subscribers to a little over 300. I'd like to say every episode gets 2,000 views. Some of them are still hovering in the hundreds, which is great. I'm happy anyone's watching it. If I can get one person to watch, to be inspired to do artwork, I'm happy. I'll go to bed at night with a smile on my face. But it's been a slow process. It's a lot of, you send out a tweet, hope someone's going to watch it. You post on Facebook, hope people are going to watch it. You join different groups to try and get the word out there. And it's been, getting some momentum lately and getting to see the show added to the UNC TV lineup. It's part of their NC channel, which is one of their 4 channels that they run. So it's not the main PBS, it's not where Sesame Street's on, but we're on one of their other channels that focuses on local programming from the state, but also art programming, which is where we kind of fit into that. And my goal is, fingers crossed, to add more PBS stations throughout the country so we can get more people to watch and hopefully get more people inspired to do some comics.
Well, speaking of goals, do you have any other goals that you have for the show other than that?
My goal is to always make it better. My goal is to improve what I'm doing in terms of building an environment for the show. So I spend a lot of time decorating the set. I have spent a lot of time and money over the years buying collectibles. And rather than have them sit in a box, I'm bringing them here and risking them getting all scratched up. But they add so much to the show. So when I have that sort of ability to make that look better, I think it makes the guests feel like the show is more legitimate. It makes the audience feel that the show has more to say because it's not just me, in my kitchen talking comics. I'm talking in a TV studio. So what I'm happy to see is that our students here are really into the show. They're really into working on the show and making it as good as I think it should be. And the last semester and this semester have been among the best episodes that we've ever done. And I'm hoping that we keep building that momentum and keep going forward.
Okay, well, back to Upton Comics.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more ideas for where that's going to go as well?
My goal is eventually to finish the first story that I'm working on. It's a World War II superhero piece called The Agreement. And it's about 3 American super soldiers who have to counter the German super soldiers. And in doing so, they sort of realize that there's got to be a better way than war. And so they're going to try and figure out how they can solve the problem of all wars. If we can come up with a way to prevent more wars, it's going to keep more people alive. And the way that they do that is going to lead to what I hope will be the next story, which is about the organization that they form that starts off with the best of intentions, but by the time we see them in the 1980s, it's turned into an organization that's really running the world in a very self-serving way. And it's going to take a new generation of superheroes to kind of pull them back from what they are doing. And it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek comedy. I always look at it as sort of the Venture Brothers meets the Watchmen with a lot more potty jokes in there. I think juvenile humor is a lot of fun. I'm a kid at heart, so my goal is eventually to finish that first graphic novel. If anyone wants to publish it, fantastic. If they don't, you can always go to my website, uptoncomics.com, and read it for free.
What are some of the underlying messages to some of those comics that you would hope the readers would get?
Well, what I'm trying to do with The Agreement is make people think about, it's kind of silly. I have the 3 characters that you can see up on the screen. I know we have another slide with just the three of them up there. The main character is the world's smartest man, cap and gown. And that's kind of a joke on academia where we wear regalia. We refer to that as cap and gown. But we also have Captain America, and in the comics they call him Cap or Cap'n or something like that. So we have Cap and Gown, who's this intellectual who's supposed to represent sort of the liberal mindset of the 1940s. And then in the middle we have Slugger, who's supposed to be the American, the typical American who rises up to the challenge and makes things better. And then we have Maxwell, who's sort of the intelligence officer who might not be as intelligent as we would like him to be. So I'm looking at them as sort of the U.S. as they enter World War II is looking to do the right thing, but then we'll start to see that the military-industrial complex gets built up, and I'm sorry if I'm boring everyone with politics, but the idea is that I'm using these characters as a metaphor for the rise of the military industrial complex and how that sort of changed the direction of the country for good or for bad. It's up to you to decide. My personal view is going to be played out through these characters, and hopefully I can make a point about what I think can be done about it, so that when we eventually, if I ever do get to that second part of it, I can have characters who will make a statement about other issues in the social sphere that are relevant today. But you know, it just takes time, and it just takes a desire to do something fun.
Okay, well, as a professor, you've given a lot of constructive criticism to students on their creativity level. So as far as your comics and comic culture goes, what are some constructive criticisms that you've gotten from other professors or anybody in the field?
Everyone has always been very nice, and that's the one thing. If you are looking to get a constructive criticism, most times people are going to say something that you might not like, but it's always with the best of intentions. So if I tell you that your video needs this or that, that doesn't mean that everything in it is bad. It means that if you did this and that, it would be better. So when I've gotten criticism from other artists, they will always tell you, I like what you're doing, but. I haven't gotten anything too specific because I'm afraid to inconvenience someone like Walt Simonson and say, hey, would you look at this? I've thought about it, but I don't want to be that guy who takes the connection that I do have and tries to turn it into something personal. Maybe that's a mistake on my part. But I have, you know, a few people have given me some ideas. Oh, you need to be careful about this, or you should look into this program to help you with coloring or something like that. I would love to get some more feedback from people. I'm just reluctant to force people to look at something. Actually, Tom Lyle did give me a piece. I tend to over-render because I work on a piece of artwork over the span of a week or a month sometimes. I'll add too much detail, and he said, you got to slow that down because there's really no reason for you to do that. You can probably get away with, you know, instead of so much line work, you can get away with just more solid blacks or something like that.
If there was somebody that's trying to be a producer or someone that's trying to create their own comics, what's one piece of advice that you would give them?
Keep doing it. There's no easy way to get into any field that you want to get into, but you have to be persistent. You have to show up every day. You have to be willing to do it. Don't be afraid to do that job that no one else wants to do. If you do it and do it well, you're going to impress the people who are hiring. You're going to impress the people that are going to make you a producer or an artist in the future.
Is there any contact info that you would like to give us?
Sure. If you're interested in more episodes of Comic Culture, you can go to ncchannel.org/comic-culture. You can find me on YouTube, youtube.com/Terrence Dollard. You can go to uptoncomics.com. You can read my graphic novel, The Agreement. And of course, you can always email me via the university. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about comics or TV.
Once again, I would like to thank Professor Terrence Dollard for being with us and allowing us to use his set. Until the next journey through someone's life, I'm Alexis Clinton, and that's a take.